As Chief Military Analyst of the Galactic Defense Council, I've documented countless warships across 300 species, but nothing, absolutely nothing, has caused as much controversy as humanity's Thunderchild-class vessels. My colleagues initially thought I was joking when I submitted my first report. Some even suggested I should be relieved of my duties, but I stand by my analysis, no matter how absurd these ships might seem. The Thunderchild violates every established principle of warship design we've developed over 10,000 years of space warfare. While modern combat vessels are sleek, streamlined, and optimized for energy efficiency, the Thunderchild looks like it was cobbled together from industrial scrap. Its hull is deliberately asymmetrical, with seemingly random protrusions and indentations that make no aerodynamic sense. The humans claim these irregular surfaces help with heat dissipation and sensor diffraction, but we all know that's impossible according to conventional physics. The weapon systems are even more baffling. Instead of the standard energy-based weaponry used by every civilized species, the Thunderchild relies primarily on what they call mass drivers, essentially enormous railguns that fire crude metal projectiles. The energy requirements for these weapons are astronomical, and their targeting systems seem primitive compared to our quantum-locked particle beams. The humans have also covered their ships with what they call point defense systems, thousands of small projectile weapons that spray metal fragments in all directions. It's barbaric. But what truly sets the Thunderchild apart is its internal design. Most warships are built around their central power core, with systems arranged in concentric rings for maximum efficiency. The Thunderchild's internal layout looks like a maze designed by a deranged architect. Critical systems are scattered throughout the ship with seemingly no regard for optimization. They've even included redundant systems, backup power cores, secondary command centers, and auxiliary life support, taking up valuable space that could be used for more weapons or shield generators. The crew complement is another puzzling aspect. While most advanced warships operate with minimal crews, relying on AI and automation, the Thunderchild carries hundreds of human personnel. They claim this makes the ship more adaptable and resilient, but it's clearly a waste of resources. The amount of space dedicated to crew quarters, maintenance access, and what they call recreational facilities is staggering. I remember watching the first Thunderchild-class vessel, the TCS Prometheus, during its maiden voyage. The ship lumbered out of their orbital shipyard like a wounded animal, its massive engines glowing with unstable energy signatures. Our sensors could barely make sense of its power distribution. Energy seemed to flow randomly throughout the ship, defying our understanding of efficient power management. The humans had the audacity to invite representatives from various species to observe their first combat trials. I attended out of professional obligation, expecting to witness a catastrophic failure that would teach humanity the folly of ignoring established warfare doctrine. The demonstration began with basic maneuvers that made every military observer in the room cringe. The Prometheus moved like a drunk Cranaxian beast, making irregular course corrections and spinning on multiple axes simultaneously. Then came the weapons demonstration. Instead of the precise, surgical strikes we expected from a modern warship, the Prometheus unleashed what could only be described as controlled chaos. Walls of metal projectiles filled space in patterns that seemed random but somehow maintained a consistent spread. Their point defense systems created spheres of intercepting fire that looked more like an art installation than a military defense grid. Most shocking was their approach to shield technology. Rather than using standard energy barriers, they'd developed what they called reactive armor, layers of metal and exotic materials that actually allowed incoming fire to penetrate partially before dispersing its energy. The entire concept seemed suicidal, yet their test data showed remarkable effectiveness against both energy and kinetic weapons. My colleagues dismissed the Thunderchild as a primitive attempt at space warfare by a species that barely understood the principles of interstellar combat. Some even suggested that allowing humans to field such vessels was dangerous, not to potential enemies, but to the humans themselves. The common consensus was that the first real battle would prove the folly of their design philosophy. But I noticed something others missed. During the demonstrations, I saw how the ship's seemingly random movements actually created unpredictable attack vectors. The scattered internal systems meant that critical damage to any one section wouldn't disable the vessel. The high crew complement allowed for rapid repairs and tactical adjustments that no eye could match. The crude weapons, while inefficient, were surprisingly effective at overwhelming modern defense systems that were designed to counter more sophisticated attacks. Most importantly, I recognized something in the human crews that my colleagues overlooked: an almost savage determination to make their apparently flawed design work. They didn't just believe in their ship. They took pride in its apparent shortcomings. Every criticism seemed to strengthen their resolve. As I finalize this initial report, I can't help but wonder if we're witnessing something revolutionary, or merely the fastest path to human extinction in space warfare. The Thunderchild is set to begin active patrols next month, and I've requested permanent assignment to observe its performance. Either I'm about to document the most spectacular failure in military history, or humanity is about to teach the galaxy a lesson about the dangers of assuming there's only one right way to wage war among the stars. Personal addendum. May the eternal void help whatever fool underestimates these magnificent idiots and their impossible ships. I never expected my first combat observation of the Thunderchild class to come so soon, or under such dire circumstances. The Kryvax Dominion, apparently sharing our initial assessment of humanity's warship design, decided to test their newest battle fleet against the TCS Prometheus. They believed, as many of us did, that a single engagement would prove the superiority of conventional combat doctrine. 3 Kryvax dreadnoughts against 1 Thunderchild-class vessel. The odds seemed almost cruel. I watched from my observation post on a neutral monitoring station, preparing to document what many expected to be a quick and brutal lesson in modern space warfare. The Kryvax ships were everything the Thunderchild wasn't, perfect examples of advanced warship design. Their sleek, crystalline hulls housed the most sophisticated weapon systems in known space. Their shields operated on principles some species hadn't even discovered yet. Each dreadnought carried enough firepower to reduce a small moon to atoms. The Prometheus's response to their arrival defied all tactical logic. Instead of maintaining a defensive posture or attempting to retreat, the human vessel accelerated directly toward the Kryvax fleet. Our sensors registered power surges throughout its irregular hull that should have torn the ship apart. The humans were redlining every system simultaneously. The Kryvax commander, likely as confused as I was, opened a communication channel. "Your design philosophies have failed you," he announced with characteristic Kryvax superiority. "Surrender now, and we will ensure your crew's survival." The human captain's response was unprecedented in formal space combat. She laughed. What followed next still haunts the nightmares of conventional military strategists. The Prometheus began what could only be described as a dance, if the dancer was having a seizure. The ship spun and rolled in ways that made our targeting computers crash from trying to predict its trajectory. Its irregular hull shape, which we had dismissed as poor engineering, created sensor ghosts that multiplied with every rotation. The Kryvax fleet responded with textbook precision, launching synchronized energy barrages that should have vaporized any vessel caught in their path. But the Prometheus's erratic movement patterns, combined with its bizarre reactive armor, turned what should have been killing blows into glancing hits. The few direct hits they scored seemed to be absorbed by the ship's irregular hull geometry in ways our sensors couldn't explain. Then the Prometheus demonstrated why humans had insisted on such large crews. Damage that would have crippled an automated ship was repaired in minutes by teams of engineers who seemed to treat the whole experience as some kind of high-stakes sport. We intercepted fragments of their internal communications. They were making jokes while patching hull breaches in the middle of combat. But the real shock came when the Prometheus opened fire. Those crude mass drivers we had mocked unleashed what the humans called a wall of tungsten. The sheer volume of projectiles overwhelmed the Kryvax shields, which were calibrated for energy weapons. Their point defense systems, designed to track and intercept precise weapon fire, prove useless against clouds of hypersonic metal fragments. The first Kryvax dreadnought lost shield coherence less than 10 minutes into the engagement. The humans didn't press their advantage immediately, though. Instead, they executed a maneuver that caused every military observer to stare in disbelief. The Prometheus deliberately vented plasma from damaged sections of its hull, using the explosions to alter its course in ways that no navigation computer could predict. The second dreadnought fell to what the humans called a drive-by. The Prometheus literally scraped along its hull, their point defense systems shredding the Kryvax's exposed sensor arrays and weapon ports. The humans had turned their ship's massive bulk from a disadvantage into a battering ram. The third Kryvax commander attempted to retreat, finally recognizing that conventional tactics were worse than useless against this abomination of naval architecture. But the Prometheus had been herding them into a carefully planned killing zone. The human captain called it the sweet spot, a position where their scattered weapon placements could achieve optimal firing convergence. The battle ended not with the elegant exchange of energy weapons we had expected, but with the Prometheus literally surrounding the last Kryvax ship in a sphere of accelerated metal and controlled explosions. When the dreadnought finally surrendered, its hull had been transformed from sleek crystal into what looked like modern art. During the post-battle analysis, we discovered something even more shocking. The Prometheus's seemingly random damage control responses had actually been carefully planned. Those scattered internal systems, they created deliberate damage paths that could be quickly isolated and repaired. The redundant command centers, they allowed the ship to maintain combat effectiveness, even after taking hits that would have disabled a conventional vessel's bridge. The human crew celebrated their victory by hosting a party, and inviting observers from all species to tour their damaged but triumphant vessel. They showed off their hull breaches like badges of honor, already planning modifications based on what they had learned. Their chief engineer excitedly explained how they had discovered 3 new ways to weaponize their own system failures. I ended my report that day with a recommendation that shocked the Galactic Defense Council. The Thunderchild class wasn't just combat effective. It represented an entirely new approach to space warfare. The humans had turned every perceived weakness into a strength, every flaw into an advantage. Personal addendum. I've requested permanent assignment to the Prometheus. Someone needs to document what these beautiful lunatics do next, and I've developed a taste for what they call victory parties. After 6 months aboard the Prometheus, I've been forced to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about warship design. What we initially dismissed as crude engineering is actually a triumph of adaptive thinking. The humans didn't ignore conventional naval doctrine. They understood it deeply enough to know exactly how to counter it. My enlightenment began during what the humans call routine maintenance, though there's nothing routine about it. I watched Chief Engineer Sarah Chen's team deliberately induce system failures to test response times. They weren't just repairing the ship, they were teaching it to break in predictable ways. "See this power conduit," Chen explained, pointing to what looked like a horrifically inefficient energy pathway. When it overloads, it creates a magnetic pulse that disrupts enemy targeting systems. We can trigger it manually or let enemy fire do it for us. Either way, it gives us a tactical advantage. The ship's supposedly random layout, it's actually based on something humans call controlled chaos theory. Every system is positioned to create cascading failure patterns that can be weaponized. They've turned the entire ship into what they call a happy accident machine. The revelation came during our engagement with the Nexar Collective's Precision Strike Force. The Nexar, having studied the Kryvax defeat, thought they had decoded the Thunderchild's weakness. They deployed ships specifically designed to counter erratic movement patterns and mass driver weapons. What they didn't understand was that the Prometheus's original combat performance had been restrained. When the Nexar fleet surrounded us with their predictive targeting grid, Captain Sarah Martins didn't just break their containment strategy. She turned it against them. "Watch this." Martinez grinned as she ordered all power diverted to what they called the Chaos Drive. The Prometheus's reactor core began cycling through controlled overloads, each one creating a unique energy signature. The Nexer's targeting computers, programmed to identify patterns, went into recursive loops trying to predict our next move. That's when I finally understood the genius of the Thunderchild's design. The humans hadn't built a warship, they'd built a contradiction engine. Every system was designed to fail spectacularly but survivably. They'd created a vessel that could turn entropy itself into a weapon. The battle itself was almost anticlimactic. The Nexer fleet, their sophisticated targeting systems compromised, fell victim to what the humans called controlled spasms, combat maneuvers that looked like system failures but were precisely choreographed. The Prometheus would appear to lose power in one section, drawing enemy fire, only to have that same damage amplify their weapon effectiveness. The ship's point defense system, which I had dismissed as primitive, demonstrated its true purpose. Those thousands of small projectile weapons weren't just for defense, they were part of a complex electronic warfare suite. The metal fragments created clouds of reactive particles that played havoc with enemy sensors. Even the ship's irregular hull shape served multiple functions. During intense maneuvers, the protruding sections created plasma distortions that acted as natural stealth systems. The asymmetrical design meant that critical hits were nearly impossible. There was no single striking point that could disable vital systems. Most impressive was the crew's integration with their vessel. While other species rely on AI to manage combat complexity, the humans had turned their inefficient large crew complement into an adaptive neural network. Each crew member could instantly switch roles, creating a level of tactical flexibility that no computer could match. I observed engineering teams repurposing damaged systems mid-battle, turning destroyed sensor arrays into improvised weapons. The medical bay became a secondary fire control center. The galley staff coordinated damage control teams. Every crew member understood not just their primary role, but how to exploit system failures for tactical advantage. During one particularly intense exchange, a Nexer cruiser landed what should have been a killing blow to our primary power core. Instead of crippling us, the hit triggered what the engineers called a constructive catastrophe. The power surge was channeled through those seemingly random corridors, emerging as a focused energy burst that disabled 3 enemy vessels. The humans had a name for this strategy: rolling with the punches. Every hit we took made us more dangerous. Every system failure opened new tactical options. The Prometheus didn't just survive battles, it evolved during them. After the Nexer fleet retreated, I cornered Captain Martinez in what was left of the officers' mess. "Why didn't you explain this design philosophy to the Galactic Defense Council?" I asked. Her response should be recorded in every military academy's textbooks. "Would you have believed us? Sometimes you have to look completely wrong to be exactly right." Besides, she added with that distinctly human grin, "watching our enemies figure it out is half the fun." Personal addendum. I've begun to notice that I'm starting to think like them. Yesterday, I caught myself suggesting ways to weaponize the coffee maker. The truly terrifying part, the engineers took notes. Looking back, we should have seen it coming. The hegemony, in their infinite arrogance, decided to end the human problem once and for all. They committed their entire grand fleet, 500 of the most advanced warships in known space, to eradicate what they saw as a barbaric infection in their ordered universe. Instead, they gave humanity the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the true power of the Thunderchild class. I was there when the hegemony's ultimatum arrived. Their Grand Admiral, a being so augmented with technology that he was more machine than organic, demanded humanity's immediate surrender. "Your crude vessels are an offense to the natural order," he declared. "Submit to civilization or be erased." Captain Martinez sent back a response that has since become legendary. "Come see what crude can do." The hegemony expected to face a handful of Thunderchild-class vessels. They hadn't realized that humanity had been building them in secret, hiding them in plain sight as cargo haulers and mining ships. When the Grand Fleet arrived at the designated battleground, a region of space thick with stellar debris, they found themselves facing 30 Thunderchild. What followed was either the most brilliant military operation in history or the greatest display of controlled insanity the galaxy has ever witnessed. Probably both. The human fleet split into what they called Chaos Squadrons, groups of 3 to 5 ships that operated in synchronized randomness. The Prometheus led what they dubbed Dance Group Alpha, and I finally understood why humans still practiced something called ballet. The Thunderchilds moved through space like a troupe of drunken acrobats, each ship's erratic movements amplifying the confusion caused by the others. Their irregular hulls created overlapping sensor ghosts that made it impossible to distinguish real ships from echoes. The hegemony's advanced targeting systems, designed to predict and counter any known combat pattern, went into cascade failures trying to track what couldn't be predicted. Then humanity revealed their masterstroke, those scattered cargo haulers and mining ships. They weren't just hiding places. They were mobile repair and rearmament stations. The Thunderchilds would dive into debris fields, seeming to take crippling damage, only to emerge minutes later with replenished ammunition and patched hulls. The hegemony responded with their standard tactic, trying to establish a containment sphere around the human fleet. It was exactly what humanity had planned for. The Thunderchilds began what they called the Blender, a complex series of maneuvers that turned the entire battlefield into a 3-dimensional cyclone of metal, energy, and controlled chaos. Each human ship became the center of its own maelstrom. Their point defense systems created webs of intercepting fire that shredded incoming missiles. Their mass drivers filled space with so much debris that energy weapons were scattered and diffused. The irregular hull shapes that we had mocked now proved their worth, as glancing hits that would have crippled conventional ships were deflected or absorbed. The Prometheus, as always, led the charge. Captain Martinez had positioned her ship at the exact point where the hegemony's formation was strongest. "Watch this," she told me with that familiar grin. "We're about to turn their perfect geometry into abstract art." She ordered all 30 Thunderchilds to execute what they called a dispersed focus fire pattern. Each ship deliberately took hits to their reinforced sections, using the energy absorption to power synchronized mass driver volleys. The hegemony's pristine formation became a shooting gallery. The Grand Admiral, watching his perfect fleet fall into disarray, made his fatal mistake. He ordered his ships to break formation and engage individually, thinking superior technology would prevail in close combat. The humans had been waiting for exactly this. The Thunderchilds paired up and executed their most devastating tactic yet, the hammer and anvil. One ship would draw fire, its reactive armor absorbing the hits, while its partner used the cover to close distance. At point-blank range, those crude mass drivers proved devastating even against advanced shields. But the true turning point came when humanity demonstrated why they had chosen this particular battlefield. Those debris fields weren't random. They were carefully positioned chunks of reactive metals. As the battle reached its peak, the Thunderchilds executed a synchronized maneuver that used their drive's electromagnetic pulses to turn the entire debris field into what they called a cosmic shotgun. The hegemony's Grand Fleet, with all its advanced technology, found itself trapped in a kill box of humanity's design. Their ships, optimized for precision and efficiency, had no defense against the orchestrated chaos unleashed by the Thunderchilds. One by one, they began to fall. The Grand Admiral's final transmission was a bewildered question that summarized the entire conflict. "How can you function in such disorder?" Captain Martinez's reply was perfect. "We don't function despite the chaos. We thrive in it." Personal addendum. After the battle, during the victory celebration, I asked one of the human engineers about their apparent disregard for conventional military doctrine. He laughed and showed me something called a jazz record. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to break all the rules to make the best music." I think I'd finally understand humanity. They don't ignore physics and military science. They just refuse to be limited by what everyone else thinks is possible. 10 years have passed since the Battle of the Debris Field, and I'm now teaching at the Galactic Defense Academy. My course, Adaptive Warfare and Human Military Innovation, has become mandatory for all senior officers. The textbook I wrote about the Thunderchild class is now required reading across 17 species military academies. The changes humanity brought to space warfare run deeper than anyone could have predicted. The hegemony's defeat marked the end of what we now call rigid doctrine warfare. Every major power has been forced to completely reassess their military strategies, ship designs, and training methods. I'm sitting in my office now, watching the latest graduation ceremony. The parade ground below is filled with vessels that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The Raxan Empire's new Stormweaver class incorporates deliberate asymmetry in its design. The Veen Collective has abandoned their pursuit of perfect targeting systems in favor of what they call probability field engagement. Even the notoriously traditional Kryvacs have begun training their crews in controlled chaos tactics. But perhaps the most profound change has been philosophical. The Thunderchild class didn't just prove that humanity's approach to warfare was viable. It demonstrated that our entire understanding of combat effectiveness needed revision. We had spent millennia pursuing perfection, not realizing that adaptability was the superior strategy. Humanity, of course, hasn't stopped innovating. The latest Thunderchild vessels make the original Prometheus look conservative by comparison. They've refined their constructive catastrophe systems to the point where their ships don't so much fight battles as conduct them, like some deadly orchestra where every system failure is just another note in a symphony of controlled chaos. Captain Martinez, now Admiral Martinez, leads the Galactic Defense Council's Advanced Warfare Division. Her latest presentation on tactical evolution through intentional disorder drew representatives from every known spacefaring civilization. The same species that once mocked humanity's designs now compete for seats at their military academies. The Prometheus itself has become a living museum, though living is the key word. Its crew continues to modify and experiment, turning their legendary vessel into a testing ground for ideas that push the boundaries of what we consider possible in space combat. The ship's irregular hull now bears the scars of 100 battles, each one a lesson that helped reshape our understanding of warfare. Last week, I took my advanced students on a tour of the Prometheus. The looks on their faces as Chief Engineer Chen, now Director of Innovative Combat Systems, explained the principles behind their chaos drive, reminded me of my own journey from skeptic to believer. When one student asked why they didn't simply build more conventionally now that they had proven their concept, Chen's response perfectly encapsulated humanity's spirit. Because conventional is just another word for predictable. The human approach to warfare has influenced more than just military doctrine. Their philosophy of controlled chaos and adaptive design has begun to affect civilian technology as well. Ships that can route around damage, systems that become more effective when stressed, crews trained to see opportunities in disaster. These concepts are revolutionizing everything from commercial transport to space exploration. Perhaps the most telling change is in how we evaluate new technologies and strategies. The question is no longer how efficiently does it work, but rather how effectively can it fail. Humanity taught us that true resilience comes not from avoiding failure, but from harnessing it. Looking back at my first report on the Thunderchild class, I'm struck by how wrong we all were, and how that wrongness revealed our own limitations. We saw a primitive, crude design because we couldn't imagine that someone would deliberately build a warship to fail in useful ways. We dismissed their tactics as chaos because we couldn't comprehend that disorder itself could be a weapon. Personal addendum. Yesterday, a hegemony representative, yes, they still exist, though much humbled, asked me if I regretted my role in helping spread human military doctrine throughout the galaxy. I showed them the latest casualty statistics from fleet engagements, down 60% since the adoption of Thunderchild principles. The humans, I explained, didn't just teach us a new way to fight. They taught us a new way to think. The Thunderchild class may have started as the dumbest warship design in history, but it ended up making everyone else look like fools. In doing so, it proved an essential truth. Sometimes the best way to advance civilization is to embrace a little controlled chaos. Final note: the humans have a saying, "The only constant is change." Thanks to them, we finally understand that this isn't a limitation to be overcome. It's an advantage to be embraced. The galaxy will never be the same, and we're all better for it.